Prynhawn da a croeso. Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this Cardiff University event. This is our first in a new series called For Alumni by Alumni Live, where we hand over the webcams and mics to our fabulous alumni to share their thoughts, expertise, passions, and experiences. Topics will inspire, engage, and spark curiosity within our community. And today's event is sure to set the bar high. We have a wide variety of people joining us today from across the UK and around the globe: New York, Ottawa, Karachi, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and American Samoa, to name a few. This event is being recorded, and we will send you the link in our follow-up email. I'm Barry Sullivan, Deputy Director and Head of Alumni Relations, and it is my privilege to introduce you to today's speakers. Pat Younge is the Managing Director of Cardiff Productions and Sugar Films, and prior to that, Pat was the Chief Creative Officer at the BBC, where he was then the corporation's most senior Black executive. Back in the 80s, when Pat was studying geology in Cardiff, he was actively involved in student life, first as the Athletic Union and then Student Union President, and represented the First 15. I'm told that's a rugby reference. And Joycelyn Longdon is a freelance marketeer and founder of Black on Black, an agency that champions diversity in the creative industries, supporting creatives of color. Joycelyn studied astrophysics in Cardiff and is now about to embark on a funded PhD at Cambridge, where she'll be looking at the application of artificial intelligence on climate change. Before I turn over to our esteemed panelists, I'd just like to remind our audience that if you have any questions for Pat or Joycelyn during the presentation, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and please let us know where in the world you are right now. So, welcome Pat and Joycelyn, and thank you for being pioneers in this new series. And I've got to ask, how do you go from studying rocks and rockets to working in the creative industry?
You want to go first, Joycelyn, or shall I?
You go first.
Well, one of the things I discovered studying mining geology is that you spend a lot of time underground, or you spend it in field with your hammer and your lens on your own, looking for mineral deposits. And after 5 years in Cardiff, where I discovered wine, women, and song, that just didn't appeal to me anymore. And so I started through student politics at NUS and then into journalism. What about you?
So yeah, for me growing up, I was always a kind of two-sided brain person. I think from like a more parental aspect, I was pushed to do things that were more kind of, business, finance, mathematical, scientific. But I grew up, creating my own newspapers and selling jewelry and doing lots of entrepreneurial stuff. So that was always there. And when I was younger, I really wanted to be a journalist, and I would read and read and read. I mean, I still do. Reading is like an escape for me. And so that creative aspect was something that was always going to be there. And after an extended period of time focusing on my degree, which was very, very science and maths heavy, I felt off, and I was thinking, why am I feeling so off? Why am I not feeling myself? And it was because I didn't have a creative outlet. And I looked back and realized that actually throughout my life, I'd always had a creative outlet to kind of go side by side my studies. And yeah, that's kind of how
That's how you ended up where you are. So I'm going to do a quick call out to Dominique from Jamaica. Happy Independence Day, Jamaica.
Oh yeah, happy Independence Day.
But I'm just going to pick you up on something you said there. I had a documentary recently, went out earlier this week on Channel 4 called The Talk, which is about the talk that Black parents give their kids about navigating racism, getting through and getting ahead. Was your talk all about, you got to study hard, you got to go to college, and not just study, you got to do a profession, basically. Was that the talk that you had?
The talk was always, you're going to have to work 10 times harder than your white counterpart, and that your education will never be able to be taken away from you, and that you need to go to university to do a degree that when you come out you can get a good job. And the main focus was banking. So even for me to do astrophysics, which is a bit, I guess, left of field, that was rebellious, yes.
But, were mum and dad right at the end of the day?
Well, I mean, Yes and no, because I think that with my personality, I'm always going to do what I want to do and what I feel called to. And that I feel like as a teenager, you find your way to where you're supposed to be. It might not be on the route that your parents may expect you to get there, but if your intentions are in the right place and if you're brought up in a way that, you know, is like cohesive, then you're always going to get there. So right now I'm about to start a PhD at Cambridge. Now the way that I got there was not necessarily the way that my parents might have wanted me to get there. And we've had to, you know, I speak mainly with my mum, and have had to get there in a way of bringing understanding as to what my interests are and what makes me happy, and not succumbing to forcefully doing something that I don't want to do.
Yeah, my mother had an idea of university, but she'd never been herself. I was the first one in our family to go, and so for me, it was literally a non-negotiable. I wanted to be a footballer. That's what I wanted to be. And I even had a club at one stage interested in signing me, and they came around, and Mum said he can come when he's finished his university studies. And yeah, that was that. And in the end, you know what? Mum's always right, and she was right. So anyway, why Cardiff?
So the year before I went to uni, I became estranged from my parents. And so I'd spent a year living with my second family and supporting myself and trying to figure things out. And I knew that I wanted to just be out of London. And it's funny because now, and actually my first year of uni, I was desperate to come back to London. I miss London so much. But I applied to no universities in London and only one university in England. Two universities in England, Exeter and Cardiff. And
Cardiff's not in England.
Oh, one university in England, which is Exeter. And the reasons that I chose my unis were they Russell Group? Where did they stand in the charts for physics? And was it not in London? And that was kind of as simple as it was. I never visited any of the universities that I applied for because I couldn't afford to come on the train to visit them. And so
I mean, like you, I grew up in Stevenage in Hertfordshire. I went to a state school, and my criteria was I had to be 2 train journeys away from my mother, so she couldn't visit me easily. Just get into my life. So Cardiff met that criteria, and if you're studying mining geology, which is what I did, there weren't that many places that did it. And when you add the rugby on top,
yeah,
and also just the benefits of the city. I mean, it's a capital city.
Yeah.
But it's the size of a big London borough.
Yeah. Even smaller.
Yeah, that was the biggest benefit of coming to Cardiff.
Yeah.
Okay, so you find yourself in Cardiff, you're doing astrophysics. I know you got a first, so let me share that with our audience. How did you find it?
I found living in Cardiff really difficult from personal reasons, not because Cardiff isn't like a brilliant city. I think that having had quite a hard year before that and having to really adjust to a lot of emotional things, family-wise, school-wise, all of these different things, it felt, I didn't realise how alone I would feel in Cardiff, and also how much I would miss London, and the privilege of being able to go to museums and art galleries and there being like 100 million small tiny underground art events, spoken words events going on, especially within the Black community, and I took that for granted a lot in London. My degree I found really hard, but I really enjoyed it,
Right.
And in a sense it made me feel super powerful, one, because I was doing a degree that I had chosen, not that a parent had chosen, and two, a degree that was highly respected. And I guess growing up I was told a lot, you know, that's not good enough, not clever enough, etc. Told by my school teachers that I couldn't do further maths, or I wouldn't be able to get a certain grade in maths, or I wasn't good enough at physics, or I wasn't good enough at all these things. And then ending on that first was just like, Oh, wait, no. I have known that I'm, cleverer.
It's validating.
It was validating.
Did you
And
send a copy to all the teachers who said that you couldn't?
no, I just
Couldn't
not
you?
like that.
Yeah, I am a bit.
I'm just like, do you know what? It doesn't matter. At least I know that I achieved that, and I'll just move on. But yeah, it was a validating experience, especially because it was such a testing degree, and also kind of I like doing things that I'm not generally supposed to do. So growing up in a council house, with a parent that does multiple jobs,
Yeah.
not in a good area, they're all things that, being black, being a woman,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that I shouldn't be able to do, and so I liked.
You like to confound people. I mean, when I came to Cardiff, Stevenage is a very white town. And when I came to Cardiff, I mean, I knew there was a historical black community there, but it didn't faze me that I certainly didn't see that many of them around the university or in the space. Now, I've got a daughter who's, I think, a year older than you. She graduated in 2018. And just before she went, she said, "Dad, I'm looking at all the materials and I don't see any black people." And then I don't know how you young people do it, but she went on one of these websites and she sort of basically said, "Help, I'm going to Cardiff University. Are there black people in Cardiff?" And then people came in and said, "Yeah, there's loads. You have to know where to look and where to find them and where the scene is." Did you find that? Is there more that could be done to sort of explain the cultural vibrancy of Cardiff?
Yeah, when I also grew up in a very conservative area. For context, my MP is Boris Johnson, and when I went to Cardiff, I kind of felt that was replicated. I didn't see a lot of myself in other people, especially because I was doing a very hard science. So usually in sciences, there's an underrepresentation of women at all. And then again, with minority students. But what I found, again, like your daughter, was going online and finding all these little groups and communities that were doing things within the creative space specifically. And were people of colour, and you slowly kind of find out what the kind of geography of people of colour is in Cardiff. So I think it was actually my creativity, or my interest in the creative industry, that brought me to people of colour in Cardiff than anything
There's
else.
a question from TJ in Cardiff. TJ says, "You're clearly self-motivated. I wonder whether you found the creative role models and supports whilst you were in Cardiff." So you found them, and I know you then went on to create some of your own.
Yeah, I think it was, I found a lot of people older than me in Cardiff, which was, again, a different experience than London, because I guess in London, the creative industry is populated hugely by people that were my age at the time. And as TJ says, there were role models. I met, I became friends with this man who was a quite esteemed poet in Cardiff, and he took me to the Cardiff Literary Awards, and I started meeting more people from that, and people's faces and names were popping up more and more often, and I was shown loads of different places. I connected with a fashion designer who I worked with in Cardiff, who showed me the big Cardiff working space there. It's I can't remember what it's called, but it's a huge working space for kind of people in the creative arts and makers. And so I started meeting all of these people who were incidentally a lot older than me, and spending time with them allowed me to get a different insight into the creative industries, and I guess approach it from a more mature perspective than maybe if I would have in kind of a different scenario.
So tell us about what you're doing now. Then you've set up Black on Black Creative, and then you've also set up Climate in Colour. But let's start with the first one, Black on Black Creative.
Yeah.
What are you trying to do, and how's it going down?
So Black on Black Creative has gone through many pivots. At first, I thought I wanted to be a brick and mortar publisher. Went to a publishing weekend and realised this is not for me. I do not want to disrupt this space. Someone else can do that. And really realised that what I was interested in was the visual arts and working kind of more grassroots, and creating opportunities for people who were like me at the time, who were quite new to the creative industry, like the formal creative industry, but had been creative for so long, and were looking for opportunities but not knowing where to go, how to get paid, etc. And so we had submission periods from a wide range of artists from, Nigeria, Brooklyn, UK, all around the world. And I would put on these launch events in order to pay anyone who was chosen to be featured on the website. And this kind of grew a community, and I was doing other sort of community events, like live drawing events. And then I really focused on trying to work with specific people and specific projects to find ways to provide financial support for creatives of colour. And then I took a 9-month break to really figure out what I wanted, because I'd never seen it as a business. I'd always just seen it as, this is a project I'm working on. I'm meeting lots of really cool people. People seem to be really enjoying it, and there's a community being created around it. And what I kind of realised, meeting more people in the space, was this agency model, which I didn't know about before. And realising that a way to bring the two together, bringing opportunities for creatives of colour, but also working with brands and companies who are getting it a little bit wrong and are not being diverse in the way that we would want them to, bringing those things together and allowing opportunities to be made in a kind of reciprocal manner. And we started creating our own in-house creatives and campaigns, and then coronavirus hit. So before coronavirus, I was in a program with Somerset House, which was a bursary program, and I was set up at Somerset House and really starting to get going. And then coronavirus hit, and coronavirus really made me realise that we have a very strong community, a community who kind of sticks with Black on Black through thick and thin, and that they're just here to receive all that I've got, basically. And so it made me just appreciate our community more, and now want to focus more on community first, rather than trying to achieve any sort of like brand status and working in just making adverts and campaigns in a consumerist way, and focusing more on people first, which is exactly how we started.
So we've had a couple of questions in, one from Neil in Caerphilly. What changes have you seen? Well, actually, that one's for me, because you're only just over 20. What changes have I seen in diversity over 20 years? I think people accept that there's an issue now in a way in which they didn't 20 years ago. I still think people still fall back on the same lame excuses. I don't know where to find them. I don't really understand them. They don't really understand me. And I just think we got to be bolder. I mean, what I find in Cardiff is that Cardiff is much more up for this conversation now than it has been in my past. I'm involved with the City Council, I'm involved with the Welsh Government, I'm involved with the Screen Alliance Wales and others. It's not me. They are all trying to get their arms around this issue and sort of deliver some significant lasting change. I think there's been lots of initiatives, but nothing has really settled.
How do you feel about that? Because sometimes, to me, and I don't know if any other people of colour in the audience feel like this, but it just feels like, is this really that hard? Is this problem really as hard as it's being made out to be?
I think it's harder sometimes. I mean, look, at one level, it's just employ people and let them do good stuff.
Yeah.
Right. At one level, it's that. I'll give you a very quick example. I used to run a show for the BBC called Black Britain. The West Indies lost to Kenya in the Cricket World Cup, which is the equivalent of Wales losing to Macedonia at rugby, right? It's an earthquake. That's earth-shattering. And we very quickly said, let's do a piece about the West Indies losing to Kenya. And we had Darcus Howe and an England cricketer and a West Indies cricketer. And they talked about American influence on baseball and soccer and inter-island rivalry, and is Brian Lara a good captain? And they had rice and chicken and peas and hot pepper sauce and rum. And afterwards we were doing our discussion, and somebody said, oh, I like that piece. Oh, I like the fact we had traditional food and all the rest of it. And one guy put his hand up at the back of the team, Henry Bonsu, and he said, I thought the item was okay, but do you not think we missed the chance to do the rise of African cricket onto the world stage? Or the rise of Macedonia as a rugby power? And of course, that story is also there. Now, we never sat down and said, let's not do the rise of Kenya.
Yeah.
There was just a groupthink. And I do think within societies, cultures, you do get a groupthink. And one of the things I love about Wales, for example, is it's much more fluid for working class people to progress in Wales than it is in England. And the Welsh are quite rightly proud of that. But that doesn't mean that therefore they see all the other pieces.
No, of course, yeah.
And so, we're doing a piece for BBC Wales about black miners. And what some people pass for banter, black miners will say, no, that was downright racism. But, we had to get on with it. So I do think there's been change, but I think what people want to see now is sort of lasting cultural change, not the not the quick fix.
Yeah.
And the thing about Cardiff in particular is it has one of the oldest black communities in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And it just doesn't seem to know how to properly engage with it to get the most out of it. That will be my 10 cents. What's it like to be a recent graduate in the COVID period, going through COVID?
I think for me, I was very lucky in this COVID period. I've been privileged in all the ways that I'm not privileged in COVID. I've been definitely privileged in the fact that I went freelance before this all happened, and looking back and seeing how things could have gone. I had a flat, I had a job that was going to end in March. It could have been very bad, but going freelance allowed me to actually accelerate my work, because so many of my clients were, we need to go virtual, we need to go online, help. And so I had a lot of work to do in that respect.
How are your friends coping with this?
It's a bit different. A lot of them were at uni, so that part has been fine on a financial scale, but not fine in terms of new ways of examinations, and that side has been quite stressful. I have a lot of friends who do work in the service industry though, and they have been really, really hard affected.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to take one more question which has come in, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about Black Lives Matter, because there's a reason it's us two on this week.
Yeah.
I think. So somebody says, how does racial discrimination here compared to the USA, where I lived for 5 years? I would say in America, it's much more in your face. It's much more overt. And the biggest difference is that the police are armed in America. You have the same degree of friction between young black people, young black men in particular, and the police. But the difference is in America, they're armed. And so very quickly you get to fatalities. In the UK, they're not. And so, you might get a beating or a broken something or other, but the number of fatalities is much, much lower. Black Lives Matter, is it a movement or a moment for you?
I don't want to tarnish the name of anyone, but Black Lives Matter is a difficult one for me, because the name of a movement has been co-opted with the name of an organisation, and that's a very difficult thing to separate. And I have had first-hand experience with Black Lives Matter, the organisation, and I would not co-opt them.
Let me help you with that one. Because I think the thing that has enabled it to move so quickly, it's networked, there is no structure, there's no infrastructure, there are no visible leaders, which means anybody can hold a BLM event, and if you can get people to it, it's a success. That's why it's moved so quickly. It hasn't had to wait for permission, and at the same time, it also means anybody can claim to speak on behalf of Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
And it doesn't actually have a formal agenda. It doesn't say we want to increase spending on black communities by 3% or...
Yeah.
And so it becomes, if somebody says we want to ban Little Britain and take down Churchill's statue,
then it will happen.
And become. So I think it's... I think it's
a moment.
Inspiration.
I think it's a moment only because we've been talking about these things for a very long time. Black Lives Matter as an organisation has lasted for a very long time. Black people, we've been here for a very long time. And I think that the revolution will come in a more nuanced and subtle way than huge social media push, huge media, wider mainstream media push, and will come with people actually doing real work with each other, collaborating and understanding where each other come from and dedicating that work, and not companies thinking, okay, right, we need to get a diversity policy in now, and then we're going to have an initiative that's to do with diversity, and then we're going to sort it. It's a more subtle, okay, here is a problem that we need to work on, and there's not going to be a deadline. Until this company ends, until my life ends, this will be something that I'm working on. And I think if people take that approach more than the sort of quick fix you talk about, then that is what will make it, you know, a movement, a real movement.
Yeah, I think, I agree with you. And I think that it's a challenge. I mean, James Baldwin wrote brilliantly in The Fire Next Time that fundamentally we sort of have to help those white people who are struggling with this get to a better place, because they can't be set free until we're free, and we can't be free until they're free.
Set free. Yeah.
We're sort of mutually dependent. We all rise together, or we all fall together. What could Cardiff University do to show that Black Lives Matters to its students and its alumni? What more could it do?
I think there are so many different ways that it can do it, and that it should be a diverse, not in terms of race, but a diverse application. So on school levels, so the School of Physics, the School of Economics, etc., really pushing to get more representation in the schools, and not only getting more POC in, but also really giving them a lot of pastoral attention. That's one thing that I found that was quite difficult. And although the Wellbeing Centre was very useful to me, it would have been helpful to have that within my school and feel like I'm respected within my school and not just on my own. And then on a wider level, just more celebration of Black life and of POC life. And I think sometimes it's nice to not have everything that Black people do be political. You know, just what are Black people in the community doing? What are Black people in Cardiff University doing? Because there's a lot of them doing a lot of things, being creative, starting businesses, being entrepreneurial, amazing at sports. How can we find ways
You got support from the Entrepreneurial Hub, didn't you?
Yeah, I got support from the Entrepreneurial Hub.
And how did that help you? How did that help you? This will be our last question, I think. So
yeah.
How did it help? Most people don't even know it existed. I didn't know it existed.
No, yeah, it's amazing, and it helped me because I didn't have any other kind of business role models at the time. And Claire was my mentor, and she really helped me just get all my ideas out on a page, allowed me space to breathe and to think, and to not have to feel like I needed to have everything figured out. And so that's a space that for current students I think is amazing, and I just think that Cardiff needs to be louder, you know, shout about these things and shout about the community as well.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Barry.
Thank you, both of you. That was brilliant, especially at the end. I was supposed to come in a few minutes ago to share some of my takeaways, but we don't have time for that. I know we still have quite a few questions that we didn't get to, and we do try to stick to schedule for these events. So for those of you who we haven't responded to your questions personally here, we will write back to you. If you're a Cardiff University alum, student, or staff member, you can join us on Cardiff Connected, our exclusive platform where we'll continue the conversation. For now, just really quickly, we have a next program of events coming up is the 17th of September, when we explore Cardiff's research on anxiety and depression in young people and how Cardiff's research is driving policy change. You'll receive an email tomorrow with links to the recording and future events. And finally, I just have to say a huge thanks to you, Pat and Joycelyn, for sharing your expertise so generously. Diolch yn fawr iawn.